What's up, my fellow YouTubies? Welcome back to the channel of Mike the Great Studios. So, a majority of March, or sometime during March, I was out sick, and I didn't really get to do any reviews on a couple of movies, and then ended up getting held back. And there were actually a lot of great movies that came out during March, and I actually did do a review on Creed sometime before I got sick, and I didn't have time to watch through all the Rocky movies because I was out sick and some other stuff came up. So now I actually have the opportunity to rank all Rocky and Creed movies from worst to best. And I actually have a couple of other videos coming up soon. There's going to be a Shazam movie review and a Scream movie review and a couple of Scream rankings. There were a couple of things that I actually missed last month and a lot of great movies that came out during March. In fact, I actually did a poll on my community tab on what were some of the best movies that came out in March of 2023, and I think nobody voted for Dungeons and Dragons, which is actually shocking to me because I thought that was a pretty good movie. And I believe 18% voted for Scream 5, and I think it was about 9% that voted for Shazam Fury of the Gods, and 36 for both Creed 3 and John Wick Chapter 4, which I still have not seen yet. So I actually need to check those out if there is a majority of that many people voting for John Wick. That's probably a movie that I gotta check out. Anyway, without being said, I know that we're actually talking about Rocky movies, so I'm just gonna go right ahead and get into the ranking. Oh, one more thing. Also, I'm still actually new to this franchise. As a point of reference, I have not really grown up watching the Rocky movies. That was something from my parents' timeline. So I've actually just watched all of these movies for kind of the first time, except the Creed movies I've watched a little bit more in my timeline since they're kind of from my timeline. But the rest of the Rocky movies, they're still kind of new to me. So if I have one in a place that you do not want it, just take that as a reference that it's still kind of my opinion. I am not as I have very little knowledge of this franchise as much as all the rest of you have. So just take that into consideration if I have something a little too low on this list. If you believe that I have something a little too low on this list. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking and just get into the video. Coming in last place for me is Rocky 5. And out of watching all the movies on this list, this is the one that I had by far the most issues with. It feels like it starts off by trying to copy some elements from the first two movies. Rocky is now back in Philadelphia in that poor neighborhood. And the rest of the plot lines that it has along the way just did not connect with me as much as I think they should have. His son is getting picked on at school just because he's Rocky's flesh and blood, which I don't entirely know how that plotline exactly works. And most of the movie is Rocky mentoring Tommy Gunn, which is a pretty unlikable character. And just the way it does that street fight in the end, the way it plays out is just weird. Like Tommy Gunn gets mad at Rocky because I don't know, his reputation is bigger than his, and he wasn't able to live out his first boxing match pretty well all that much. And you just can't resonate with Tommy Gunn's motive just because he's just like a very unlikable character. And the way that street fight played at the end was just so ridiculous. The highlight of the movie, I guess I'll say, is I like the 90s old school rap soundtrack that it has in it. That just makes the movie a little bit more unique and has it stick out a little bit going into that era of the 90s. But the rest of the movie along the way just did not work. So for me, this one easily comes in the last place. At number 8 is Rocky 2. And I feel bad for having it this low on the list because this is the movie where Rocky wins his match against Apollo Creed, which is a pretty big part of this franchise. I even like the training montage that they got where all the kids are following Rocky up the Philadelphia stairs. But the rest of the movie along the way, I feel like had a lot of elements that did not work for me. The whole reason, the motivation that they give Rocky is that he's stupid and he spent all of his money from that boxing match just to buy Adrian a couple of gifts. And now he's out looking for jobs. And the whole reason why he goes back into that match with Apollo is because Apollo is motivated to fight him. And Adrian gives him that, Adrian has that line in the hospital that's like, win, just win. So this movie is successful for Rocky winning the fight against Apollo Creed, but the rest of it I just don't think really worked for me. At number 7 is Rocky Balboa, and this placement on the list doesn't mean anything bad about this movie. I actually really like this movie. It was nice seeing Rocky at this stage of life, showing how a lot of time has passed since the last match, and him and Paulie owning this little restaurant. And even though Adrian isn't in this movie, that doesn't mean there's no motive for Rocky to just keep moving forward. And I love the movie's essential message about it's not how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. That conversation that Rocky and his son have outside in the street is probably one of the most powerful moments in this entire franchise. The rest of the movie isn't as memorable to me. That means like this movie isn't too low on this list just because there's a lot of stuff that I didn't like about this movie. There's just not a lot that I can say about this movie that can really make it shoot up any higher on this list. So for me, I think it's pretty fair to put it at number 7. There's not really much else I can say about this movie. At number 6 is Creed 3, and while I feel like this is the weakest of the Creed trilogy, that doesn't say a lot for how great this movie was. I love the new visualized choreography that Michael B. Jordan had put into some of the fight sequences, and Jonathan Majors as the main opponent was just perfect. He was the standout inside of this movie. He can be antagonistic pretty well. And I even didn't mind Sylvester Stallone's absence inside of this movie. I think it made sense for him not to be included inside of the movie because it did something different with Adonis's character arc. And I do feel like there's some magic missing from the first 2 movies. I feel like you can easily tell that Michael B. Jordan's script is a little bit different than how it worked in the first 2 movies. But I still really enjoyed this movie when I just saw it in theaters, and even at number 6, this was a great story. We've made it into the middle of the list with Rocky 4, and I'm just going to cut right to the chase. This movie's standout is just the soundtrack. It has my favorite soundtrack out of all these movies with Hearts on Fire, and There's No Easy Way Out, and even the James Brown dance sequence with Living in America. It just has the 80s just oozed all onto it. And I even liked Ivan Drago as the opponent. He's definitely the most horrifying out of all these opponents with the fact that he's able to kill Apollo Creed in only 2 rounds. It's just makes for a pretty antagonistic opponent, a pretty horrifying, deadly opponent for Rocky to face. And it just brings the stakes up pretty high. And that's just like most of the elements that I loved inside this movie. There's a lot that I can go on saying about how great this movie is inside existing in the 1980s, but it's just a pretty fun time. I enjoyed this movie. At number 4 is Creed 2, the follow-up to Rocky 4, actually. And this is the movie where I think the stakes are higher for Adonis than ever, where he loses his first fight against Victor Drago in the beginning, and it just shows how important this fight is to him as well as it is to Victor Drago, actually, because it actually gives the Dragos a little bit more of a story and a journey, because whereas Ivan Drago from Rocky 4, he was just like kind of this throwaway 1980s stumbling villain, and in this movie he's actually given a little bit more personality. And that's kind of the stuff that I really think worked about this movie, was that it actually gave the villains a story as well as Adonis a story. And Rocky doesn't have as much of a story in this movie as he did in the first movie, but that doesn't say a whole lot about how this movie really worked and how it really did something for the Dragos. Making it into the top 3 is the original Rocky, and to be honest, these top 3 are actually kind of tied for first. This one is pretty much tied for first. It was hard for me to decide which movie was able to fit where because they're all pretty good, but I decided to put Rocky at number 3. And this movie was responsible for starting this franchise and the sports genre for the modern era. And it's just a very compelling story about this guy who was never really given a shot, is kind of a nobody, and he's not hungry to just win a fight. He just wants to go the distance. And that's just what really worked for this movie. And it's all put together with just Sylvester Stallone's just great performance as this character. He does something unique and interesting with the performance and just does something new for all the rest of a bunch of other A-list actors that came up afterwards. And so this movie was just a great sports movie, and it's just a great Rocky movie, and just one of the great sports movies of all time. The runner-up here is Creed, and once again, this movie is almost tied for number one with my number one pick, but I decided I like my number one pick just a little bit more, and this movie almost has a placement for being my favorite sports drama of all time because it just has such a compelling story for our lead character. I like how it shows Adonis' backstory, as he doesn't really present himself as a real Creed, and him living in the foster community, he hasn't really felt like he lives up to the Creed name. And the way that he goes on his little hero's journey, this little journey is just like so powerful, especially how you have Rocky mentoring him. Rocky being in this mentoring role just adds for some nice new elements inside of this franchise. This movie just made for such a compelling story and just such a great movie inside of this franchise. Well, even standing alone, it works both as a Rocky spinoff and just as a standalone sports drama. So for me, it's number 2 on this list and almost has a possibility for being number 1. But I decided there can only be one. Coming in first place for me, though, is Rocky 3. And as I said in the beginning of the video, I am still kind of new to the franchise. So I don't know how controversial it is for me to have Rocky 3 at number 1. But this is the movie that I just felt like I had the most fun as I was watching it. It starts off with the Eye of the Tiger music piece, which is probably one of my favorite 80s old school rock songs. Just an iconic 80s song. And I even love, this is the movie where we got to see Apollo training Rocky, and we got to see that friendship between Apollo and Rocky start to develop. And it just, I like Mr. T as the villain. It just has a lot of those iconic elements. I Pity the Fool, and just introducing society to Mr. T. So this movie obviously had so much going for it as a movie inside of this franchise. So for me, this one comes in at number 1. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite movie inside of this franchise is. Is it Rocky 3? Let me know. And remember to like and subscribe. I will see you next time. Goodbye.